Welcome back to the Customer Discovercast. This is your host, Ethan. I'm here with Dom, who's the founder and CEO of Uniqorn, which is the largest rural incubator and accelerator in Southwest France. Dom, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ethan. Pleasure being here.
Absolutely, man. It's very exciting to meet someone like you because you are essentially living my dream. Years from now, this is what I would hope to be doing.
Well, let's live it together. Let's figure out how to live it together.
Absolutely, man. Tell everybody who doesn't know you out there, tell them a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in France. I did spend roughly a quarter century in the US, in particular in Los Angeles. Half French, half German. So I'm officially Alsatian from the northeast of France. About 2.5 years ago, decided to leave sunny California versus going there like most people intend to do and come back to France. Didn't intend to retire, probably could have, but instead, since I'm rather hyperactive, I decided to open the very first incubator accelerator in this part of France. We are in a rural area in the department of the Dordogne in a town called Sarlat. That's Sarlat, for those of you who want to look it up. It's a medieval town where many movies were filmed, including Joan of Arc, obviously clearly a medieval movie.
Absolutely.
And when they did film that movie, all they did in town is take the cars out. Everything else stayed the same. So you'll see it on Google Images when you look it up. It's a beautiful town.
Really?
Roughly 9,000 people during the year, but 3 million tourists a year. It's the 7th most visited town in France. But as COVID indicated us, right, has shown us, if you rely only, if you're one trick pony, you only rely on tourism to make it work. And then from one day to another, there is no more tourism. You can imagine what can happen.
Absolutely.
And we are
especially
very
at a
much
time like this.
Yeah, we're very much experiencing that right now. So the pain is being felt by all of the restaurants, all of which are closed, have been closed for months, and will be closed for at least another month. All of the bars are closed. Some of the hotels, or if not all of the hotels, are closed. So they're really, really feeling the pinch. So before COVID, we told the mayor, the local elects, et cetera, that we wanted to help diversify the economy and really bring a strong dimension of digital into the space. To certain of them, we had to explain what that meant. I think that 2 years later, they really understand it now because they see a very strong dynamic of growth. While other companies are shutting down or downsizing, we are growing exponentially. We've also become a significant attraction pole for both startup entrepreneurs and angel investors because we've created an ecosystem that relies on both. Clearly, very much like an Uber or an Airbnb platform, you need to have a perfect balance in our case between supply and demand. The supply is the supply of capital. The demand is the demand that comes as a result of startups moving here and wanting to work with us that need capital to develop themselves. In that same line of thinking, we're in the process of working on a mega event in October 1, 2, 3, the Startup Super Cup. The idea of that World Cup for startups, for lack of a better term, is to bring together both startup entrepreneurs and the capital. So we'll have roughly between 1,000 and 1,200 people, 12,000 investors, angel investors and funds, and 100 startuppers and 100 people from the media, all of which will spend a 3-day weekend, 1, 2, 3 of October, together with keynote speeches, with roundtables, with exhibit spaces. Obviously, we're in the south of France. You're going to get quite a bit of wine and foie gras and whatever else comes with it. So if I need to twist your arm, to actually come pay us a visit, that's probably a decent way of doing it.
Absolutely.
But, we do believe that we are in the perfect ecosystem in which you can thrive. And what I mean by that is that, look, I spent the quarter century in Los Angeles. Look, if I want to do 15 kilometers or 15 miles in Los Angeles, if I get up at 4:45 in the morning, I'll do them in 10 minutes. If I get up an hour and a half later, it takes me 3 hours, right? So if that's the best we can do, as developed as we are today, then I'm sorry to say, it's probably not working out really well, right?
Yeah, a
If I
little
have
bit of
to
a
wake
working
up in the
vacation,
morning, I see,
right?
yeah, if I have to wake up in the morning, I see a big cloud of smoke in front of me and I breathe that in. That's not how I want to live the rest of my life, right? Et
Exactly.
cetera, et cetera. You can go down the list. For another example, for young startups who listen to us, or for angel investors who invest in the startups, is if I have the choice between, let's say I'm an investor, which I am, if I want to back a promising startup and they're in London, New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Tokyo, Hong Kong, out of all places, you know, equal things considered, all things considered, would I rather back that same startup if their monthly rent bill is $50,000 or if it's $1,000? And that's actually the
Absolutely.
ratio we're talking about between a place like Hong Kong and Saint France, right? And our place is going to be nicer, right? You're going to be
Absolutely.
living and working out of a medieval building, looking out the window onto the Dordogne River, where you're going to be kayaking in the afternoon, right? So it's primarily driven by a lifestyle choice, I'd say. And again, we did this move way before COVID. And what COVID has done is it's clearly accelerated the path of awakening startups, founders, and investors saying there's got to be a better way to do this. Okay. And we truly believe today that we are not the only one, but certainly one of these better ways to live and to thrive.
Absolutely. Man, very well said. You really highlighted not only on kind of the core purpose of your business, because from an entrepreneur who would actually be like someone within your target demographic for what you're looking for. I was thinking of the funnel from an investment standpoint, right? You want awareness at the top of the stage, where it's really about networking and media, and then learning as well, that stimulated learning from people who have done what you're aiming to do. And you handle that, the consideration and the decision, the bottom of that funnel, is really handled by having angel investors. So you've really highlighted all of that and then more, because then you take it's like a working vacation, to where you can potentially get investment, network with people, and you can go out kayak and get some delicious food. I've always heard nothing but great things about France. I thought it was a place where I'd wait until I find, a fiance or a wife before I'd take it on. But hey, maybe I could go check it out a little early.
35 main potential fiancés waiting for you here. So,
There we go. If they're in the business too, that's it. That's the dream match right there. That's awesome. And look, it's like matchmaking in person right there. That's perfect.
yeah.
So, yeah. What I wanted to ask, by the way, because you've highlighted that really good, and we'll touch back on that later. Tell us more about how you got to where you are today, because that's really relevant to our listeners. We're all kind of working towards where you are right now, and everyone has kind of their unique path, but we're very interested in what got you started. What was the passion that ignited
You
this
know,
journey?
it's kind of interesting because I can look at it in hindsight today, because when I first made my move from France to the US in 1993, uh, I was at that point in time, there was one search engine. It actually wasn't truly a search engine. It was a directory called Yahoo that most of us know.
Oh yeah.
And in 1993, had you done a random search for internet marketing consultants, I would have been one of three matches in March of
Wow.
1993. And 6 months later, I wasn't there anymore because I had moved on. But if I look back and if I had to sum up 25 years of my life of what happened, because again, I'm a workaholic. This is my passion. This is what I do every single day. I'd probably sum it up in one simple sentence. That sentence would go as follows. And it would be in relation to France versus the US. And I can sum up my journey by saying that it's been easier making my money in the US, but it's so much nicer spending it in France.
I was going to
Okay.
ask you about that. Yeah, keep going.
And
Keep
I would
going.
say, that was very much true over most of the last 25 years, but it's dramatically shifted where France historically was not necessarily on the top of everybody's list to launch a startup. But as a result of the dramatic changes that have taken place over the last 3 years, 2.5 years, which were instilled by President Macron, uh, his government basically put in a tremendous amount of incentives, which are falling roughly under the umbrella of the French tech system. So some of you may have heard of the French tech. The French tech label is actually a very powerful label that makes it very easy to operate a startup in the technology space in France, and has a tremendous amount of incentives to help you thrive. Easier access to funding is one of them. A tremendous amount of R&D credits, young innovative enterprise credits, et cetera, et cetera. You can basically, if you're in the R&D space, if you develop, for example, AI, if you develop augmented reality, virtual reality, and you hire 2 PhDs that are freshly graduating out of university from the top schools, the government will pay for them in full for 2 years
What?
and write you a check for 20% in addition to that for your trouble.
What?
That's one extreme example, but as very often is the case in France, some of these incentives are very closely guarded secrets because being the government, they're not very good at communicating them. So you will see some absurd, at least what appears to me as absurd initiatives being taken, such as the government purchasing LinkedIn ads and Facebook ads to promote the fact that they're giving away money.
Wow.
That's pretty insane if you think about it, right? With an American
This is non-existent
perspective
over
on
here.
this, right? You would never see that, but it does. I see it every day, right? We
Yeah.
just want to remind you that we still have grant money open for this and this and that. Paid sponsored ad on LinkedIn, right?
Right.
You subscribe to French Tech, I guarantee you right now, if you go to LinkedIn, you just subscribe to La French Tech, you'll click on it, and within the next 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to see 1, 2, or 3 of those messages, without a doubt.
Wow. And you have to live in France in order to do this, right?
You have to be incorporated as a French company to do that,
Okay.
which we do for these startups that come and see us. We do 2 types of, we can switch gears a little bit here. 2 types of work for startups. We incubate and we accelerate. Core difference between the two, incubation is earlier stage company. We do not take on companies that are pre-proof of concept, right? Regardless of what domain they operate in. But for example, incubating would include sometimes incorporation, where we handle everything that's accounting and legal. So we have full staff, including accountants and lawyers that actually handle all that part. So for those of listeners who are very concerned about what we all heard out of French administration, et cetera, well, our service is turnkey, right? Basically, you come to us with your project, you get full support, all that's taken care of for you in a concierge type of service, and you do sit down and you do what you do best, which is create your startup and promote it, right?
Absolutely.
And we help you along the way, we nurture you along the way, which is also important for angel investors because we work with a number of them. Again, with thinking that we're building an ecosystem where the two can thrive together. If you are an angel investor, which I am, first and foremost, every deal that comes in our door, I'm personally invested in it. So don't take my word for it. My money speaks for itself. I'm the first investor. We go through a vetting process, obviously, like most incubators, accelerators do. Once a company graduates and is being welcomed to come here, right? I'm the first check writer. So what that does, because we have quite a few investors that follow what we do, it creates an interesting dynamic. For example, we're in a silent period right now. I can't name the name of the company, but a company that we started incubating 10 months ago will go to market in Canada and in Germany next month. So from the time of incubation to the time of public market listing will be roughly 11 months during COVID, right? So
Wow.
we've worked relentlessly during these periods because we can do it behind the scenes, behind the doors, behind closed doors. But we'll basically have this poster child out there showing to people that Here's what we've done. We've taken this company from inception to public market listing within a period of 11 months during COVID.
That's awesome, man. I was actually going to touch on that because even in your introduction, I didn't even mention that you're an angel investor. And one thing that this is a relatively untapped space in terms of knowledge space, right? In terms of what do angel investors really look for? It's something that almost seems too far out of reach for a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. They don't even consider it because they're like, why would someone give me money? So kind of help debunk some of those myths and talk about what you
Yeah.
look for in a company, or really just in a founder before they even start, perhaps. Like, what do you
Oh,
look for?
yeah. I mean, let me just touch upon something you said that's absolutely, resonates with me. It couldn't be, you just hit the nail on the head. There is absolutely still today a very deep gap between, I call it the expectation gap between the startup entrepreneur and the investor. It's like a world in between. And that world already existed back when I was a startup entrepreneur in the 90s, where I was working on my projects, right, on a digital marketing platform, and I had no idea. I was broadcasting on FM, and the investor was listening to AM, right?
Yeah, I see what you're
That's that's how amazing it was, because I was explaining in my business model, and I was somewhat a geek to him, and I was called a nerd or a geek very often in that space. And I was like, how can I not break through? How can he not know this? How can he be invested in similar companies without knowing the nitty gritty, right?
saying. Right.
And then I had to completely reinvent myself, right? But the bottom line today, again, with 25 years of hindsight, is the fact that I've been on one side, that startup investor, and on the other side, I have been the investor. So I can quickly turn the table and take the perspective of either one of them. Okay. And what's really missing, and you hit the nail on the head by saying that, is you're missing that in between, that link between the startup investor and the angel investor in this case, right? That basically puts them all on the same wavelength where they're both broadcasting either on AM or FM, but they're listening to the same station. Okay. And
Right.
that's very often what we're doing. So, one concrete example I gave you a little bit earlier is the fact that when an angel investor is looking to back a startup, okay, he very rarely wants to be first money in.
Right.
So when I talk to them and say, I'm in, not only am I in with my cash, I'm in with my entire team. We're already working on incubating, accelerating. And then I basically keep him, he may not move at that point in time, but it's going to give the story a lot more credibility, a lot more authority. But I don't expect him to move, and I'm not asking for his money at that point in time either, right? I'm just going to say, watch what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Put you on the list, show you the progress of what will happen. Boom, boom, boom. You see things moving at light speed, and then the phone starts saying, "Oh, are you still looking to raise money for that deal?" Right? Well, maybe, right? The last thing you want to be as a startup investor when you're raising money is desperate. If you're desperate, if you sound desperate, either if you truly are desperate or if you sound desperate and you're not really desperate, trust me, that energy is pervasive. People
Mm.
would run away from you, not only your investors, your employees, your potential partners. No one wants anything to do with you, right? So you have to be, positive psychology is first and foremost, no matter what happens, right? The second thing you want to do is you don't want to overstate what you're doing or what you intend to do. That's a huge red flag for most investors, including myself. Okay. Be straightforward, be realistic, be honest, obviously, and be authentic. Don't try to be someone you are not. One of the main reasons why I moved away from Los Angeles, right?
Ah, yeah, I've heard so many people talk about that. They're like, it's just not good for the soul, you know?
That's right. That's right. Don't, I mean, why are you forcing yourself? You spend your entire life trying to be someone else. So one little anecdote there, I had this very hyperactive waiter at one point in time at some restaurant in Los Angeles, and he started singing when he came instead of taking my order. Okay, maybe I like his singing, maybe not, but I want to eat. I'm hungry, right?
Mhm.
Oh, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I'm an actor." I'm like, "Then what are you doing here?" As a waiter, if you're not, shouldn't you be acting, right?
Mhm.
And then he quickly walked away. I wasn't his table anymore.
Oh,
But
really?
strange dynamic right there.
Yeah, I've actually never been to LA or California in general. I'm actually going to Texas for the first time on Monday, but it's like I've heard that anecdote so many times. I've heard like, every waiter you see is an aspiring actor or, singer and, very
And
few.
to their benefit, many of them actually, made it. They
Yeah.
obviously struggling artists, and nothing. I'm not knocking anything about that. But if you want to be an actor, by all means, go for it and believe in yourself, right? What I'm knocking is the inauthenticity,
Hmm.
right? And if you want to raise money, keep in mind you are a human being talking to another human being, right? And ultimately, that investor, the first question I ask myself is, would I go fishing with that guy? If it's a guy, okay? Or if it's a group of young entrepreneurs, would I go on a 1 week vacation camping with them? If the answer is no, honestly, I'm not interested, right?
Right.
So you have to understand those kind of dynamics, because if I'm investing in your deal, whether it's cash or resources from my team in incubation acceleration, we're joined at the hip. We're in this together. There's going to be some rough times. I don't want to hear you cry on my shoulder. This is your deal, right? We got to have some ground rules here, right? What are you expecting from me? What I'm expecting from you? And if there's strong common ground, let's start talking, right? But you want to make sure that there is not a disconnect one way or the other, because otherwise you're just making your life miserable.
Absolutely.
That's also
Yeah.
true. That's also true the other way around. I don't, I would never say as a startup entrepreneur, but with many of them, I'm going to be very blunt. I'm going to be very direct. And if that's not for you, don't take me on as an investor, because that's who I am, right? That's all I know how to do. I'm not going to reinvent myself at this stage in my life for you, even if you become the next Uber. I don't care, right? Because life's too short for that. Okay. And I have missed out on great opportunities from companies that had massive exits because I just didn't get along with one specific person or one specific group. Okay. And I can perfectly live with myself as a result of that, having missed out on huge windfalls, right? I would much rather, for example, we're bringing in a new company right now from Normandy that has developed an AI technology for runners. Husband and wife team. Wife is French. Husband is Jamaican, which basically means he runs faster than she does. And
I'm from the Caribbean,
great.
so
Yeah,
I feel you.
exactly. Great team. Former Olympians, both of them, and they've built an AI app that basically analyzes your posture when you're running,
Hmm.
the angle of your head versus your shoulders, your elbows, your knees, et cetera, and does corrective measures to make you a better athlete
Mm.
with scientifically proven that you can significantly have a dramatic increase in performance, athletic performance, number one. And number two, significant reduction in injuries. Because if you're running properly, you just not logical, right? You're injuring yourself to a lesser propensity. So
What is the name of that company?
it's called Ochi, OCHY,
OCHY. The reason
Ochi.
why I
And
say that is because actually I've already recorded the episode. We spoke with the founder of FitLift, who does something very similar. He coded kind of like an Apple Watch app, and it monitors in several planes in the exercise physiology industry. We call it sagittal, transverse, and I forgot the last one, but basically ensuring that based on data that you're performing things optimally based on
yeah,
biomechanics
yeah.
and proper form. So it's crazy to see how AI and it's basically taking over to put the power in the consumer's hands so that less people get injured and more people can work out more efficiently. I love it. Coming from the fitness space, I would love to check out that business. I'll reach out to
Oh,
them.
for sure. I mean, and I mean, interesting you mentioned AI, because a lot of people are afraid of AI, and you've probably heard of the term runaway AI.
No,
For
I
me,
haven't
that's
actually.
yeah,
Talk about it.
runaway AI. Basically, the idea behind runaway AI is that we have human beings on one side who are relatively predictable, one-dimensional, and on the other side, you have this very powerful technology that is becoming so powerful that eventually will run away and leave us way behind.
Gotcha. Yep.
Hence the Terminator, who's going to come and kill us all,
Right.
right? Well, that's great for Hollywood, makes up for great storytelling, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, what's happening is that we're actually, all of us humans are being slowly enhanced by AI. So instead of having a human being on one side and AI on the other, disconnected, disjointed, we're actually merging with that technology and becoming one, right?
Absolutely.
So we cannot run away from ourselves,
Yep.
right? We're all going to be enhanced, right? For those of you who are, follow some futurists like Ray Kurzweil, who already 15 years ago wrote one of the most fascinating books I've ever read called The Singularity is Near. It turns out that he's hardly ever wrong. He's off 1 or 2 years. Bill Gates calls him his mentor, so that probably means something as well, because he doesn't call anybody else his mentor.
Right.
You have this idea of the singularity is that sometime between 2030 and 2035, human biology and technology will merge and become one.
Oh, like Neuralink, what Elon Musk is working on.
Very much so. Neuralink being one iteration of that singularity, where clearly you're connecting the technology to your neocortex and eventually would have access to the sum of human knowledge since the early days, right? So my sounds highly futuristic, very unlikely, science fiction type. Trust me, it's not. It's
I don't
happening,
think so at
right?
all. I mean, if you look at both of us right now, uh, we're immersed in technology in the sense where it's around us and on us, right? The only next step is putting it in us, like just like having a pacemaker and medical predictors, little chips that can predict seizures and such. It's not that far off whatsoever. I
Without a
mean,
doubt. I mean,
yeah,
this device, any smartphone is basically an extension, of
yeah,
to our brain, right? It's directly connected. If I'm holding it in my hands, it's directly connected to my brain anyway,
yeah.
right?
If you have an Apple
A
Watch,
tactile function.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's on you. Yeah, it's amazing. But I speak with a lot of friends about this because I myself did my research. I read several books on AI, did several projects that would basically it's glorified statistics in the sense of what artificial intelligence is. You basically take you take training data and you build a model based on that and compare that with training data on an ongoing basis to kind of compare the certainty, the level of certainty, and improve it over time. You tweak it, and it's very meticulous in nature. A lot of machine learning engineers are like, it's very interesting, but it's not the most. It's very interesting to them and exciting, but for most people, it's so boring just tinkering with a mathematic model over and over. But the thing about Runaway AI, I believe that's very preventable when you code these AI models for very specific use cases. I think people think that AI is just going to be this generative house robot that's just going to replace wives and husbands and kids. No, it's like it's already
And
in our phones.
self-replicate while it's doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, it's going to have a baby eventually. No, it's like, it's going to help us drive our cars more efficiently and help us, with several specific use cases, which will make our life much easier.
Very well said. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, yeah, the fear mongering, I hope eventually stops. And well, I guess it's biased to say that I hope we do adopt it. Everybody doesn't have to do that, but it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think ultimately what people want to see is they want to see real life applications of the technology, right? So if
Right.
I get up right now, I'm in a medieval town, so I
Hmm.
can draw that little metaphor, right?
Right.
So in medieval ages, people's lives were miserable. They were dying at the average age of 38. I would have been long gone, right? Of all sorts of crazy diseases that we eradicated, right?
Right.
Today, if I get up from my chair and I flip on the switch, the light doesn't come on. It's mayhem, right?
The Wi-Fi doesn't connect.
Case in point, a few weeks ago, Time magazine named COVID-19 as the biggest disaster that ever happened to mankind. When I read that title, I was like, is this kid 15 who wrote that article? Do you mean to tell me that COVID-19 is worse than the Vietnam War, that World War II, World War I, the pest and the cholera that we had, killing millions of people around the world. I mean, how can that even be? I mean, we've kind of like lost touch with what reality really is, and we need to take a little bit of hindsight of how far we've come, right? Yes, COVID has killed too many people. We can all agree on that. Okay. But if we compare it to some other disasters that we've suffered from, this is like walk in the park. Let's be honest. We're not out there. We're not starving. Okay. During World War II, you were a hero when you were on the front lines getting killed for your buddies. Now you're a hero when you're laying in your couch. You're not going out. You're not going outside. That's what's being asked from you, right?
Right.
You know, please stay home, don't go out. Be a couch potato. Turn on Netflix.
Watch Netflix. Yeah.
Bravo, you're a hero. You did an amazing job.
Play some
Think
video
about
games. Yeah. It's been a
think about a
blessing.
lack of perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like it's actually kind of nice. Like I don't mind it at all. Like I'm somewhat of an
Well,
introvert
see,
anyways, but we could get
in
our
my case,
extrovertedness here.
yeah, in my case, because I had been traveling for 17 years, sleeping in hotel rooms for 300 days a year. The first month of COVID, it almost like I think I hibernated. Right, I I was I was catching up on 17 years of sleep, and I was sleeping. It seemed like an eternity, but it must have been 9 or 10 hours of sleep. I was sleeping at night, versus my 4 to 6.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting because I doubt that there's any I would say there was probably a lot less of a reduction in productivity than you probably initially thought. You were like, how am I going to meet with these people? Maybe. But now you're like, oh, Zoom call. I don't have to travel to go see them. I don't have to drive here. I don't have to go get breakfast out at a restaurant or anything like that.
Well, see,
I can do it here.
very interesting point, and here's what I think we're going to experience going forward. So, while everybody's predicting mayhem, because mayhem tends to attract more people and fascinate more people than good things. Unfortunately, that's how over the last 250,000 years, that's how our brains evolved, right?
Hmm.
We get chased by a bear or by a wolf or run away, right? We understand that fear factor. But I think what you just mentioned, the fact that most all of us had no choice but to rely on technology to make things work, it's in particular in smaller areas, for example, in France, where people had never made an online purchase before. And now they discovered the wonder of Amazon France or Cdiscount, which is the big competitor that's giving Amazon a run for its money here, and realizing, oh my God, I didn't get ripped off. My credit card didn't get stolen. My credit card didn't get stolen. And the stuff actually showed up on my doorstep much faster, much cheaper, much more efficiently. Then it's the first time for older people using Skype, using Zoom, using Google Meets, Microsoft Teams, whatever your favorite brand is, and being able to interface with people remotely, learn remotely, speak to people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's going to happen is that as a result of these leaps in productivity, which again, all of us more younger people, we've used this for many, many, many years, but large swaths of the population had never touched it before and had no choice but to, and now they're accustomed to it. So what that will do in terms of GDP growth and overall productivity growth for years to come, we should not underestimate. Will we have a little blip on the radar? Because if you look at the GDP map for the last 100 or 150 years, it goes like this, straight up, up, up. Tiny little blip for World War II. You can barely even see it. Keeps going up, up, up. Okay, oil crisis, little blip, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 2008, little blip, but it's always upward trending. What I think will happen is that this path will significantly accelerate as a result of these tools being democratized and demonetized. Right. So again, I'm old enough to step back and remember 1998, when just to build and host a few websites, my hosting bill was $7,000 US a month.
Oh,
At the dollar worth in 1997, 23 years ago. In between 1998 and 2002, if you had a database, if you wanted to run a database on SQL, you needed an Oracle server license.
Mhm.
You know how much one Oracle server license costed between 1998 and 2001?
No clue.
$32,000 per instance, and we were running 5. So basically, you were in a situation where unless you raised a significant amount of money up front, you could not even be in business and run what we can do out of our bedroom today, right? So that's what I mean by
Accessibility.
democratization and demonetization, the two Ds running basically in parallel. And that trend is unabated, right? Things that cost an arm and a leg. So when I first moved to the US and I made what was called back then, you may remember this, a long distance call,
Mhm.
right? People, families were discussing get off the phone faster because you're on a long distance call, right? If you tell this to a young person today, they're like, what the heck is long distance call? Well, long distance call was at some time in 1993, between 1993 and 1995, would set you back $1.30 to $1.50 per minute, right? So you'd call from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Okay, a 4-hour car ride. You call your buddy in Las Vegas for 10 minutes, it costs you $15, right? If you stay on for an hour, it costs you $60, right?
Mm.
Internet access. When I came on in France, I was paying by the minute. There was no such thing as a local call, so it was very, very cost prohibitive. And what we're seeing are these dramatic leaps in productivity, which all drive this democratization, this demonetization effect at a very, very large scale. And that's why today we're seeing more startups being launched in emerging countries, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, et cetera, than ever before, because it is become so cheap for anyone to launch a company virtually overnight that no one has any excuse not to do it. The
Absolutely.
only downside that you have today is that as a result of it becoming so easy and so cheap to do, is that everyone can compete,
That's right.
right? Everyone becomes your competition.
But that's
So
good though, to a certain extent.
to
Only
a
the
certain
best will
extent,
rise
it's
above.
100%. So what happens as a result of this great equalizer, again, going back to democratization and demonetization, and everybody being able to launch a business virtually overnight for very little to no money, is that it's become more and more important for intangibles have kicked in that will, where you actually have to differentiate yourself from your potential competitor. And differentiation is really where you then make the difference between separate the wheat from the chaff, right? What makes you different? So you have to be a better PR person, you have to be a better
Personal brand.
communicator, you have to
Yeah.
become a better marketer, et cetera, et cetera. And what I see very often are relatively mediocre products and services vastly outperforming much better ones just purely upon better communication, right? So if you are an engineer or a group of engineers launching a product, make sure you get some crazy guy out there, a marketer, a great communicator on your team, because he can be the make or break. Vice versa, if you want to be in the tech space and you only have marketers, you likely need an engineer, a pretty good one as well, right?
Absolutely.
So when you're building a team, and that goes back to an earlier question that you asked me, right? How do you do what you do, right? I think one of the fundamental things you want to think of very, very early is team building. And when you do team building, think of a team as a puzzle. When you're building a puzzle, let's say that puzzle has 100 pieces, and since you're launching a business, you're obviously planning on succeeding. And you're telling yourself, well, in 2 years, 3 years, I may have 100 employees or 100 people I want to work with. You're the first piece on that puzzle. Okay, you place that piece on the board, which means that you're there. I don't need a second me because there's no room for that second me on that board. And otherwise, I don't need somebody like me patting me on the back, et cetera, making me feel comfortable while I have a gaping hole on this side.
Right.
Your job as the founder, as the CEO, as the key driver behind the business is to make sure that you have all of these puzzle pieces neatly interconnected and that they jive with each other so that you can
Absolutely.
fill that puzzle. That is today probably one of the most challenging tasks that you face as a startup entrepreneur. And when an angel investor looks at you and at your team, that's where you hear this all the time. They all say the same thing. First thing I look at is the team. What they mean by that is to look at the puzzle. I want to make sure that that team can execute upon the premise they set for themselves. I want to make sure that they have both the brain power and the balls. Some people call that IQ and EQ. I
Hmm.
call it brain power, brain and balls, right? To actually get it done. And don't underestimate the balls part, right? Don't underestimate the hustle. Because if you look at scientific research, the results are unequivocal. It has been proven over and over that EQ outperforms IQ when it comes to entrepreneurial success. In the ideal world, you have both, hence the team, right? Or some individuals have both. Congratulations, right? But without a doubt, the hustle part is super important. Why? Ask yourself a question. Ultimately, no matter what it is you're building, a product or service, that product or service needs to be sold, right? A true hustler will outsell an engineer any day, right? A non-shy person, an overtly extrovert will outsell that shy person, the timid person any day. And that's what drives the bottom line. You need to generate revenue as quickly as possible, right? And hustle can drive that revenue in very, very early stages, in the very early innings.
Yeah, my question for that, because that is a common when they say statistically speaking, the two founder system works best, the hustler and the hacker. But then they say, of course, you want the hustler, the hacker, and the what do they call it? The hippie, I think it is, the basically the person that's going to design it as well. But what are your thoughts on if it's a solo founder who has done well in finding a gap in the market to where, by experience as well, being a solo founder who's kind of like that business and product guy. Uh, sorry, I'm sniffling a lot, but basically that solo founder who's found basically a good matrix of bringing on basically interns essentially, or people who are in their master's programs looking for world experience for a capstone project, to where it's kind of like a solo founder system, but it's maybe 10, 20 people ultimately filling those gaps.
I see. If he's a solo founder relying on this type of talent pool, then in all likelihood he would describe the guy that I mentioned that has a high IQ and a high EQ, right? But he's not doing it himself. He's not doing it all alone. He's smart enough to realize that he needs to fill those gaps, and he is basically hustling to build this team around him, right? One way or another, where what he doesn't like to do, what he is not really good at, is those shoes are being filled by someone more qualified than he is in order to get it done. But you're basically coming back to team building, to actually having that puzzle. So he might very well be a solo founder, but if he's facing as a solo founder an angel investor, he's going to have to make a very compelling, give him a very compelling reason why you should invest in him by describing that he's built a system, a platform, whatever you may call it, where he leverages tools like Fiverr, like Upwork, et cetera, in an efficient way, and then he can get that to the finish line, right? At some point, the investor is probably going to tell him, look, I understand that you're doing this today, but at much larger scale, I doubt that this will be sustainable. That's what I would tell him at least, right? Do you think you can do this successfully, continue to do this successfully once you reach 10, 15, $20 million in sales versus 1 million or whatever it is today, right? And he
Right.
may say yes, and then I'll hear him out. I will ask him how. right? And he may come back and say, well, we've built system to leverage Fiverr, Upwork, and other freelance platforms at scale. Here's how we've done it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd be impressed. I'd probably give him a shot as well.
I would say the rebuttal, and of course, strictly hypothetical situation, would be that this is to get to the point at which, the team can be further incentivized by salary versus equity, right? Because when you get to a certain point to where the platform's created and, you can bring on paying clients and you gain traction and ultimately gain investment, at that point, it's a good time to begin the hiring process, right? Your initial team of maybe 5 people or, 3 to 5 people, let's say, but it doesn't have to be something leveraged permanently. It could be something that can be built upon and always supplemented. But once you get partnerships with the head of employer relations at various universities, this is something that's starting to grow in popularity. Other founders have told me about it. You can essentially build out a team. You can build out a founding staff, about 2 to 3 founders, and then have kind of a working staff of people who are maybe interns or students and such. And it's really interesting that you could build a pseudo company before you actually build a real company and really put out equity and salary on the line.
No, I mean, that goes right back to the original bootstrapping ideas, right? Show creativity, which is very sexy thing for an investor to see. So if you can show traction by not spending any money, by being this guerrilla marketer, this guerrilla entrepreneur, that goes a very, very long way, because you actually show tolerance for pain, right? And that you're willing to put up with these obstacles, even though you might be able to have it easier and go faster. And it's always easier to go faster on other people's money, right? Everybody understands that. I think the tolerance for pain too, for example, internally, because I happen to own the local rugby team, semi-pro rugby team here in Sala as well, which we actually took over in full during COVID, is I actually have 7 rugby players that work internally at Uniqorn in a number of startups. And what I realize is, like, look, when times get rough, I can shove these guys around because they're
They're
accustomed
here.
to it,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah, I don't even phase them, right? They get a smile out of it. You know, I can give the guy a hit over the head. He's going to hit me back. You know, we're going to laugh about it, right?
That's right.
So it's amazing to be in a situation like this where, you know, the tolerance for pain is very, very high. I come from a prize fight, you know, from a prize fighting background myself at an early age. And I remember the first time I went in the ring when I was 5 years old against a kid who was 5 years older than me. Well, he beat me to shreds and I was bloody.
Really.
And I cried like any kid would at my age. And then it was, the coach asked me to sit down for another hour and a half because he had to take me home because he was my ride home. And after everything was over, he asked me, "Hey, Dom, how did you like your first session?" And I cried even more. And then he
It
came
was
to me,
great.
gave me, and then he gave me finally a hug. The first warm thing he did for me, he says, "Here's the lesson today for today, son. It's never going to be any worse than this."
Nice.
And if I look back, we're talking 45 years ago now, all right? In the fighting sport, it never got worse because I knew exactly what to what you know, how it
That's the
hurt.
worst
The
that could happen. Yeah.
second session is you're going to learn defense, so it never happens again, right?
Right.
This can never happen again. So it was a life lesson that I remember like it happened yesterday, even though it happened 45 years ago.
A painful lesson learned early, but to have your guard up, learn defense, right? So that doesn't happen again. Stay on the
Without a
offensive.
doubt, which for entrepreneurs and angel investors, or even institutional investors, gets to the point of failure, right? Some cultures cannot cope with failure. In some cultures, failure is looked down upon, right? Failure for me is iteration, right?
Absolutely.
In a world like today, basically what you want to do with failure is you want to fail as quickly as possible because it's a lot cheaper, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So
Let's go.
instantly iterate as much as possible. Expect the failure. Don't be shocked when you see the failure, because if you do that, I mean, come on, you're starting off wrong. You know you're going to fail multiple times before you ultimately succeed, right?
Right.
So again, when I started in the business, in the digital business, going back to 1994, 1995, one of our first businesses back then was to sell websites. So in 1994 in the US, when you picked up the phone, you called a business, you tried to sell a website, the first answer to the business was, "What the hell is that?" Right? So you explained to them what a website was, and it's like, "You got to be out of your mind, boy. This is all a fad, this internet thing." First of all, they called it back then the information superhighway before calling it the internet,
Really?
right? Internet was late 94, probably early 95. Then Netscape Navigator came along, and then everybody called it internet after that. So it's interesting how you tend to lose touch with, what really happens. And what the other thing I see a big mistake is trend chasing, right? Is people trying to see what's going to be next, trying to anticipate, consumer behavior, business behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think it was Jeff Bezos that said something very profound at some point in time, is that what he focuses on is not what's changing, what's about to change, but the opposite, what will not change, because that's much more predictable, right? So what will not change? We're going to continue to eat. We're going to continue to clothe ourselves. We're going to continue to seek shelter. We're going to continue to educate ourselves. Eventually, after COVID, go on vacations, et cetera, right? That's something you can plan for because it's always going to be here. And now try to figure out how you can actually improve the customer experience within those domains, as Amazon did, making things cheaper, making things more efficient, making things instantaneous, et cetera, et cetera. And look at them today. When I drive across Germany, there is at one point in time an Amazon warehouse that stretches for 20 miles. I've never seen anything like this in my life,
Really?
right?
Holy
At
shit. No,
first
I
I
didn't
thought,
know that.
am I hallucinating here? Is this thing stretching, or or
Still going?
am I not moving? And on the way home, we measured it with my wife and I. The thing was endless. It was unbelievable. You
Wow.
know, I mean, trend chasing reminds me of the early stages of Google. And obviously, I'm a dinosaur in the digital business. So I grew up with the web crawler, with Lycos, with Alta Vista, all of the early search engines way before Google. And then still today, you get people who think they can actually trick the Google algorithm and be number one, number two, number three, et cetera, by playing games, by doing black hat SEO
Yeah, Black Hat
strategies. Right?
SEO.
Absolute fool's game, right? If you think today, for example, if you came to me as an entrepreneur, which happens every once in a while, trying to tell me that you can fool Google, you're the fool.
That's right.
Here's the door. See someone else, right? I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah, see you on the last
But
page of search
that's
results.
it.
Yeah, one thing you said, and that's huge because that's really our scope, right? I mean, the mantra, and I can't pioneer it, of course, or claim it. Mark Zuckerberg said it, and it resonated so deeply. Move fast and break things, because a failure to innovate is a failure to fail. And if you fail to innovate, you're gonna basically trade off a lot of small incremental failures that lead to a lot of revelations for one big failure, which is your company going under because you didn't try to innovate, you didn't try to take new leaps and bounds. So you have to budget for that. I mean, just like Jeff Bezos said, he's made billions of dollars in mistakes, but that's ultimately why he's a billionaire, because of those mistakes. Some of them
That's right.
were like home runs where he scored 400 runs rather than, four. So I mean that's huge. Like, I wish people could reframe their mindset in business to being afraid to fail and public failure and whatnot, to making these incremental steps. And some might not work, but some might be life changing. They genuinely are life changing. You can
That's right.
discover hidden opportunity.
There's a
It's
very very
magic.
simple rule of being a billionaire. Figure out how to help a billion people.
Exactly. Yeah, but you can't do that all in one try. If you get it if you get it right the first time, it's super rare. I don't even know if that's possible. So I wish more people could internalize that. I think it'll help out, the general consciousness. But yeah, Dom, it's been great speaking with you. Um, is there anything that you want to tell the listeners before you go? How can they find you? How can they learn more about the Unicorn Accelerator?
Yeah, so you can find us at unicornincubator.com. That's unicorn with a Q. So UNIQORN, incubator.com, all in one string. For those of you who want to contact me directly, I'm Dom Einhorn. That's DOM. Last name is spelled EINHORN. By the way, Einhorn means unicorn in German. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. My direct email is Dom, DOM at unicornincubator.com. And again, unicorn with a Q, not a C.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Dom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.